Hi, it's Steve, and I am here with Khalind Namar. Khalid, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
It is my pleasure as well. So, I'm interviewing you for the Gallery of Freedom Fighters, and it's all about freedom. So, let me ask you to start your tale by answering the following question. Why is freedom so important to you that you are taking a stand to defend it?
Well, I think the main, well, let me start. Freedom to me is the ability to experience everything that life offers, to reach one's full potential without any undue government or other restrictions, not just government restrictions. To be a free, responsible individual, because freedom and responsibility go hand in hand. I don't want to be free to harm other people or to take other people's things, I want to be free to reach my potential and have responsibility with that. So that's what freedom is to me, being able to reach my potential and to experience everything that life has to offer and be responsible with that. So that's what I consider freedom to be, or why it's important to me is because of history. If you look at history, you can go back 1,000 years. Much of the battles that were fought for freedom, freedom to practice whatever religion wants to practice. That's been a huge one. Freedom to speak, freedom to live, freedom to exist, uh, freedom uh, to explore, freedom to travel. In other words, people do not want to be held into a box, restricted on how they think, how they speak. And this has been the battle throughout history. We can go back and pick any one of the many wars that were fought over one of the various freedoms. There's wars fought over slavery. There's wars fought over there's religious wars. There's wars fought over where people can live or where they are forced to live, or, in other words, it's important because history tells us that if we don't fight for it, we're going to lose it. And there's two ways that you can lose your liberty. You can surrender it or have it taken away from you. And I think now what we have is people are surrendering their liberty. It's not even being taken as much as it's being surrendered. And I think that fighting for it, it to me, it honors the people that have come before me who have really fought for it, who had to live under real tyranny. I have parents who grew up in the segregated South for a time, father Mississippi, mom Arkansas. I have grandparents who were West Africans, who were brought here in the late, I shouldn't say brought here, because that part of my mom's family was came here willingly in the late 1870s. But either way, they came here for a better life. And everything that they've done for me to be here, I honor that. I respect that. And I don't want to ever squander that or take that for granted, because so many people have done so much for me to be here living the life that I'm living. And for me not to preserve that or honor that and try to continue that on is a disrespect to me. And it's a dishonor to the people who have come before me. And there are people who are going to become after me, because who are going to be after me, after us. What are we going to leave them? And what is it going to say about us if we do nothing and allow this thing to collapse? So there's a lot to that. And people being free, a lot of times, as a simple case of them, knowing what freedom is, because if you don't know what your rights are, how do you know when they're taken away from you? And that's what we when I go to schools, I talk to people all the time, and I say, you have to know what your rights are, or you won't know when you're losing them. And that's kind of where we are. So when I talk to young people, I get them to understand some history. I point out things that are going on right now today in other countries and ask them, why do you think people are coming here? They really don't know where they come from and where other people come from, because we have it too good here. I think we have had what I call a prosperity paralysis. We've had it so good that it's made us worse over the last, say, 50 years. Because they say, was it tough times make strong men? And my father, your father, those were different type of men because they grew up in a different time. They had to be more responsible at a younger age. Now, young people, they have more entertainment than any group of young people ever in the history of mankind. There's all this entertainment. We think about it, there's movies and there's toys and there's all these TV channels and there's gadgets and there's electronics and when you think about kids who grew up in the 40s, all of their entertainment was outside the house, and it was in a tree or a pond or a creek throwing rocks or, you know, but there's so much entertainment because young people now don't really have to grow up for a very long time. But our fathers and grandfathers, I guarantee you, they were employed when they were 14 years old because you had to be an adult much sooner because times were tough. So I think now times being relatively easy has made us weak. It has made us apathetic, and it has made us ungrateful, which is why we have a host of problems going on in a society where younger people, and it started with my generation, are just so drunk off of prosperity, and they're spoiled, and it makes us weak. So I think connecting to history is how I stay grounded. I got a vast library here. I'm always trying to go back and read and see how people live day to day, and it makes me go, wow, I have quite an easy life, So whenever I think I complain about my job or something I have to do, I go, this is pretty much nothing. My uncle worked in a steel mill for 40 years. And I'm working in front of a laptop. So it's I just try to stay grounded and understand that if you don't preserve what you have, you're going to lose it. And I think that's what's happening. People are losing sight of what real freedom is. And to them, freedom becomes so much more complicated than it really should be. And what I mean by that is learning that freedom is being able to enjoy the simple things of life that a lot of people take for granted. Going out and walking in a park, listening to birds, sitting on your front porch. Those are some of the most basic freedoms that people in other countries don't have because it's not safe. They may not have the ability to do it unless they're told they can do it. But here, freedom has become a lot of things that it shouldn't be. It's become a sense of entitlement. It's become a sense of I should have everything I want. I should be able to do what I want regardless of the consequences. There's that responsibility piece. There's no responsibility to it. It's just I should be able to do. It's like a child. I should be able to do what I want when I want to do it, and you shouldn't tell me otherwise. And if I mess up, you should help me get out of it. So it's just it's no responsibility. There's rights and there's responsibilities. People learn their rights, never are they told responsibilities. And these are your freedoms, but here are your responsibilities that go along with it. And I think that has made for a very unhappy society who thinks it's all about rights and no responsibilities.
You've done a very good job of presenting that, and in particular, you've emphasized responsibility. And you've also mentioned, obviously, you've had a very good upbringing. What is the source of responsibility? What is the source for you of the objective responsibilities that everybody should be following? How do we know the rules here?
Well, I think what it comes down to is respect. It's respect, it's humility. In other words, I know what my dad went through for me to have this kind of life, and rest his soul. He passed in 2016. But he worked a lot had two gas stations. Back in those days, you fixed cars and you pumped gas. You didn't sell potato chips and soda pop and all those other kind of lottery tickets and all that. You just fixed cars and you pump gas. And that was back when he had old Ohio gas stations. Remember that?
I do.
Yeah, he had a Ohio and he had a Sunoco, and the margins were thin back then. But he gave us a pretty good life. I had a pretty decent sized house in inner city Cleveland. I had two apple trees and a pear tree in the backyard. It was pretty, maybe about a full acre, I would say. Not too bad. Uh, the respect that I have for my parents who were married very young. My mom was 15, my dad was 19 years old. By age 23, my mom, number five.
Whoa.
So, yeah. So I have so much respect and regard for what that had to entail, raising a family of five for very young people. That keeps me humbled to know that somebody did that for me. And so the responsibility comes with having respect and gratitude for where you are. Gratitude or lack thereof it is one of the worst things one of the worst human traits is a lack of gratitude. Because without gratitude, there's entitlement. And that's what exists in an empty space of gratitude is entitlement. So I'm always conscious of why I live such a good life because of what people have done to put me here. My parents, teachers, other influences. That is a responsibility that I have to acknowledge that and then try to do something for someone else, just as someone has done for me. And I'm really am grateful. The older I get, the more I realize the life that my parents had growing up in the South, being parents at a very young age, which is what you did in those days. And the fact that they sacrificed a great deal for me to just have this kind of life, I have to do something with it. I can't squander it. It's just I have to do something with it. It's like if someone cooks you a really nice meal, a really nice 3-course, 4-course meal. They put it on the table for you, and it's set nice for you to eat, and then you basically just turn the table over and knock all the food on the floor. That's how I look at what some people have done with their lives that someone has set up for them. Someone that your parents have worked and given you a good start, and then you basically have squandered it. That's
Do you ever call
disrespectful.
people out when they do that? Do you ever confront them and say, "Why are you knocking over the table there?"
All the time.
What kind of reaction do you get?
Well, I get usually some respect and humility because they know they're wrong, particularly when we were dealing with younger people in my family who have unfortunately products of their generation. So you have to let them know, hey, this is what was done for you. This is what your mother, this is what your father have done for you. You can't screw this up. And I think about my dad all the time in the sense that this is what he's worked for me to live the life that I'm living. He's not here to see it. So the best way to honor him is to live as best I can possibly live, which is what he worked for. All that hammering, because he did all the work on the house himself. He was just that kind of guy. And I'm thinking all the work he did was for me. And the best thing I can do in his honor is to live the kind of life that he wants me to live. And I talk to kids all the time. And I explain this to them all the time. Your parents are living for you. They're out there working so you can have a good start. And the best thing you can do is not dishonor them and disrespect them by throwing this all the way, because they could be doing something else. And they're here for you. They're here right now. Your parents, some of them, I'm sure, they work on their feet all day. They work in jobs they don't like necessarily, but they're doing this for you. And I think the best thing you can do for them is to be your best. Booker T. Washington, whom I adore, I read him all the time. He would tell he gave speeches every Sunday to his students. And one of the speeches he gave, he talked about mother and father. And he was saying to them, ask yourself before you do something, would my mother or father approve of this if I did this? And I guarantee you'll be better off if you ask yourself those questions before you did something. You know, and I think it's that sense of responsibility that people don't seem to have. You ruin your family name when you go out and you do something. I have a dentist who is a third generation dentist. He's in his 60s. He's a black man. His father uh, and grandfather, well, his father raised him in Shaker because he was a very popular dentist in the 50s and 60s. He was able to move them to Shaker when there was only a few. Shaker Heights, Ohio, for those who don't know, is a pretty well-to-do uh, suburb here, which was started by the Shaker religious community back in the 1800s, which became a very well-to-do suburb. A lot of well-to-do people there. So he had a very middle class lifestyle. He stole some candy from the store in the maybe mid 60s or something, and his father found out about it. And he said when he got home, his father was ready to go to war with him because he said, "You have my name, and you're out here ruining the name that I gave you." He was violently angry with him. He said my dad was moving furniture around. He was ready to he was
Ready to
ready to
rumble.
yeah, absolutely. And he figured that out because here it is. My dad put me in position. He gave us a nice community to live in, and I have his name. So it's up to me to keep respect on that name. And I said to him, I said, "Your father grew up in the 30s, didn't he?" He said, "Yeah, he did." I said, "Yeah." Because at that time, we had to be serious people. We had to be very serious people. There was no fun in games. There was no playing around. And that's something I understood. And I actually have taken that story and I've told that to kids when I speak to them because it's about that respect. That was disrespectful for him not to understand. Hey, if I do something, people are going to say, "Hey, that's Mr. Johnson's son." And that's what has always kept me on the straight and narrow. I realized I was not going to hurt my parents. I was not going to go out and embarrass them because my mom worked for the city of Cleveland. She knew a lot of people, and people knew my father. And I was never going to have them hearing bad things about something I had done. So it's that respect that is gone in a lot of our communities. People don't care about the name. They don't care about ruining the family name or embarrassing their parents or bringing shame upon their family and their parents. I think that's to me, that should be the eighth sin, you know, especially when your parents have done so much, put you in a situation, and then you soil their name and dishonor their name with bad, irresponsible behavior.
So, do you think you're doing a good job of preserving the family name?
I think so. I think so. Because my mom, she knows a lot of people, and when people meet her, they always say nice things to her about me, and that makes her feel good. Even people she's never met, if they meet her, they always, you know, come up to her and they always have all these things to say about me, and she loves hearing that. So, um, and the last person, which kind of touched me a bit, I went into a store in the east side of Cleveland, and it was an older gentleman there, and I was raised in a Muslim family. So back in those days, a lot of the Muslim families, at least Black Muslim families, were pretty close. They kind of knew each other. And I ran into a guy who knew my father. And when I told him who I was, a little bit about my background, he said, "Oh, he said, I know your father." And that made me go, wow, it just reminded me of what it was like growing up, where I would always get the question, "You're EJ's son, aren't you?" And so I take that very seriously. Uh,
Is
so
your
I've
mom
always,
proud of your activism?
oh, yes, yes,
Why?
definitely.
Why?
Well, because my mom, believe it or not, she's 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 okay. So my mom converted from Islam back in the early 80s, I would say. So she started studying the Bible in the late 80s. She became a minister. Uh, and at a non-denominational church where she was one of the core founders of it. So in that transition, she kind of found her values, which caused her to separate from the church because they went one way, and she said, "Hey, these are not our values," and she went the other way. And so a lot of the values that I have, I learned from her and my dad, and this is in line with a lot of things she's taught me, and she has a lot of the same beliefs, traditional beliefs, conservative beliefs. So she is one of my biggest fans.
Tell me about those values. How would you summarize what these values are?
Uh, very, very traditional. I guess what you would call um, old school, family centered Southern values where my parents come from. Respect for authority, respect for your parents, discipline, respect for country, um, and living a life of that honors God, honors the community, honors your family, and based on just good old fashioned hard work and discipline. Um, I think and owning your mistakes, because we were always taught growing up thoughts of things, and you own your mistakes. If you do something, it's yours. Own it. And my dad used to always tell me, your word is your bond. You have nothing else but your word. So he would always make me shake hands with him, and he had a real firm handshake. And he would always make me say, word is bond, because, if you don't have that, you don't have anything.
You must be very demoralized by the lack of accountability and all the buck passing that takes place around. Does that get to you?
Every single day, it brings my temperature to a boil. That volcano uh, that erupts from time to time in Hawaii has nothing on my temperature. When I hear the excuses and the weakness and the lack of responsibility that is preached from the top down, and that's where the problem is. It's top down, lack of wisdom. When I go back and I read the Booker T. Washingtons and the Frederick Douglasses, those men are long lost. Their wisdom is long lost. They have nothing in common with these people who call themselves leaders. We don't need them anyway. They have nothing in common with these people because they will be run out of town if they were saying the things today that they were saying back in the late 19th century, early 20th century. These people have nothing in common. Martin Luther King would be run out of town based on the things that he has said back in the early 60s. These people now are excuse merchants. And Booker T. Washington said something years ago that is probably more true now. He said there's a certain group of race problem solvers whose job it is to keep the grievances and the problems of the Negro before the public. And they don't want the patient to get well because they will lose their jobs. Said this about over 100 years ago. Well over 100 years ago, he said this, probably 120 years ago. Now, if that isn't more true now than it was when he said it, nothing is.
So what gives you hope? I mean, it sounds like you're painting a picture where, gee, uh, things are as bad as they could be. So what keeps you going every day?
Well, what keeps me going is I have a platform, I have a voice, which is I'm doing radio. People are listening. I started writing a few years ago. I haven't written in years, but I started writing a blog, and I had all these articles. I had thousands of views on that. And then I started doing radio, so people are hearing me. Then I started getting opportunities to speak at schools, which helps me. It's like therapeutic for me because I do get the chance to put my imprint on young people. And I see things now, at least for me and others who are getting platforms to speak. I see a landscape changing a little bit. I see the playing field kind of, I won't say leveling out, but I see opening up a little bit to where there's a few people that I could join forces with, and we can get on the field and we can probably make an impact. Now, I think it's going to be very difficult. It's like going to be pushing an elephant uphill, but because you have all these dark forces that are working against you, you have so much non-wisdom in our community. You have the church, which is not a lot of wise people in the Black church right now. There is the media, and then there is the Democrat Party machine that beats down any type of uplifting, non-victim messaging. They just can't stand it. So I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a battle, and somebody like me who's built for the fight. I don't care about names. I don't care what you call me. I don't care about any of that. It's going to be somebody that's going to have to take the bows and arrows and continue to speak and try to get a big enough community started of like-minded people. They're out there. I think a lot of them don't have the courage, but a lot of them I'm finding more and more about. They're all in the closet. So that just gives me a little hope that there are people who out there who are speaking out more so. I was on the Glenn Beck show back in 2008. It was an audience full of people who look like me, who think non-traditionally. So I'm looking at back then as opposed to how many there are out there now, and that's encouraging. There are people with YouTube channels that I've made contact with recently, people with other platforms. It's just a matter of us coming together in some way and being able to get a message out, which is more connected to our past, because the answers to our problems in our past. We've done this before under much more brutal circumstances, but the difference is those pillars that we stood upon to help us attain heights have been destroyed, and that's the family, the church, and the schools. Those are the pillars that we stood upon. Booker T. Washington was a Christian. Booker T. Washington was a former slave. He was a philanthropist, but he also built one of the most prestigious universities in the country with no government help. And he gave his students, he said, you're going to come here, and you're going to get a mechanical education. You're going to get an industrial education. You're going to get a religious education and a moral education. And you're going to go out in the world and build your communities, and you're going to provide things that people need. Now, this was in the late 1800s, and he was giving this kind of optimistic message. But he said the key things: if we can train your hands and your head, but if we can't train your heart, then it's no good. So here we have a bunch of people who have full hands and empty heads and black hearts. Only then will you have a complete education. And he understood this that's why the book was called Up from Slavery. Up from Slavery. He wanted us to do the focus more on not just industrial education, agricultural education, so we can build communities, but focus on cultural improvement. He wanted us to be morally upright. He talked a lot about this. We didn't listen. We went straight to politics, which he was not a big fan of us going into politics because we felt we were being used. Many people couldn't read or write, but they were put in position of political power. And it took the focus away from things that we should have been focusing on. And he was right. He had such vision, but we didn't listen. And we went headfirst off the cliff after several decades of progress. And now we've hit the bottom of the pit after falling off the cliff because we did not listen to probably the wisest man Black America has ever seen.
So we're picking ourselves up out of the pit. So are you optimistic for what life will be like here 100 years from now?
Wow. Well, that's a very, very interesting question. And honestly, I'll just have to say no. And I'll tell you why. What has destroyed this country? One of the main things, I think there's like this axis of evil, I'll call it, right? There is the university, not education per se, but the university as an institution has helped destroy this country or get us to where we are. It has turned out a bunch of America hating, uh, neo Marxist minions, and they get all these bad ideas, which we thought we fought in Europe in the 30s and 40s, and they keep coming back. You notice all these bad ideas come from like Germany. You know, there's critical theory and Marxism and and fascism and Nazism. It's like Germany has produced some of the worst ideas the last 200 years, but they keep finding a way in our universities. It's unbelievable. Colleges are helping to ruin the society. Two, the media. And three, I would say Hollywood, the entertainment industry. That's the axis of evil. And they all work kind of hand in hand in many ways. Some of the people who worked in the media go work at the White House and then back into the media. And then some of the people who work in the media go into Hollywood. You know, I think one of Obama's speechwriters, was he's worked in Hollywood. He's like writes films or something. It's like they go back and forth. And a lot of people in the media are married to people who work in politics. So there's this incestuous relationship between all of them, and they have all ruined or helping to ruin our young people, our education system. They're all products of our universities. So without colleges, I think we have a chance. Not without trades and education, productive education, because this country that was built, say the first half of the 20th century, was built by men primarily who were not college educated. They built the Hoover Dam, they built highways, they built factories, they worked in steel mills, they built cars, and these were not college educated men. And women too, who worked in certain fields. They were not college educated, but they were productive. They knew how to go to work. They knew how to raise a family. Now we have a bunch of educated fools who can do nothing but destroy the country and teach kids to hate the country. And on top of that, they're not productive.
Well, I got to tell you then, Khalid. So if I'm one of the people in the back of the room listening to you and I'm kind of thinking about getting in the game, getting off the bench, but if you're saying, in 100 years, I don't think so, I'm going to say, why bother? Give me a reason to get in the game today.
Well, because right now we're alive today and we're here.
Okay.
We can get involved with where we are right now. Because it's almost like if your house is flooding, you got to get a bucket. You got to try to stop the water from coming in, right? You can't just sit there and go, well, it's going to drown. Now, I can't speak to what's going to happen in 100 years. But what I can tell you right now, there are things that we have to get involved with right now, or else it's going to be over in just a year or two. This whole house is going to wash away in just a short period of time if we don't stop what we're doing. One of the good things about Trump's election was, regardless of how you feel about him, it's almost like all of this has been exposed through his election. We knew things were going on, but now it's all out in the open. It's no longer any pretension. So let me tell you what I think people could do. You have to inside out get involved. Inside out, meaning inside your communities right now where you live, and then you focus out. We do a lot of work with Americans for Prosperity on the state level. We just managed to get school choice funded in the budget. We will still have work to do, but that was a huge victory because it's pulling kids out of this school system that's poisoning them. It's giving kids a chance, parents a chance to pull their kids out of these government schools into better schools. There's Hillsdale College classical education schools opening up. I'm going to be involved with them, hopefully, as well. Pulling kids out again, getting them out of these government schools. That is a huge victory because the teachers unions is one of the apparatchiks that is helping to destroy this country. Other teachers unions, they buy politicians and they indoctrinate kids with all sorts of dark dark philosophy and thinking. So that's where we get involved locally, inside out, right where you live, in your precincts, in your local school boards, your legislators, state legislators. You got to fight there, because if you look at Washington, you'll get like totally discouraged for just looking at Washington. No, you live here. Tip O'Neill said all politics are local. You live here. And I think that's what many people that I know are doing right now. People you've talked to a good friend of mine recently, Jonathan Broadbent, who is doing great work out in Geauga County. I know people down in Medina, Ohio, who are fighting, and other places, getting on the school boards. We've gotten some good people elected in the state who have helped us push education choice. So that's one thing. Also, I think that when it comes to some of these grassroots meetings, you got to put pressure on these people who you've gotten elected. Because what happens when you have a meeting and you just go home and do nothing, nobody knows about your meeting and nobody really cares. But if you take this meeting you just had and you translate it into some sort of action, it makes a difference. And we have gotten some people out of office recently for that reason. You just take something and you put it into action. And I think also you find different ways to affect change where you live without necessarily having to rely on politicians. So what I do, I volunteer a lot. I volunteer to get in front of kids, because I'm telling you, speaking to kids directly without the filters, without the gatekeepers, makes a huge difference. It does. Giving them something else to look at, another message, helps. So that's why I volunteer. I get in front of kids, no matter what they look like. I go out and speak in the suburbs. I go speak in the city. It doesn't matter, because these are all of our kids, and they need to hear from me more so than any celebrity. I don't have a rap album. I haven't played in any sports leagues, but I'm going to be there. I'm close to trying to get to a school nearby here on a regular basis, because that helps. When you get in front of young people, you give them something different to look at. Because I remember the messages that I received when I was younger from elementary school and middle school. And I don't know if you remember, actually, are you from this area, correct?
I'm from New York City.
Oh, okay. You never been in Cleveland?
No, I haven't
Oh,
actually.
I thought you had roots here. But anyway, there's a local news guy here. He's pretty well known. He's been around a long time. I don't think he's still working, but he came to speak to my middle school back in 1983. And he talked about education and what was to come in terms of automation. And I remember so many things that he said that turned out to be true. So I ran into him years later, and I repeated things back to him that he said. And this was 20 years later or something. He was blown away.
Wow. Along those lines, let's wrap it up this way. You're speaking a lot to kids. Let's fast forward to the 50th anniversary of the class of 2023. They're at a 50-year anniversary, and these are kids who you spoke to last month. And they're getting together in 50 years from now. What are they going to say about Khalind? What are they going to remember about you from these talks you gave in the summer of 2023?
Hopefully they'll remember that I told them, that there are other paths to choose other than college, that you can find your passion, find a way to make a great living, and you don't have to do it through college. There's more than one way. Hopefully they'll tell me, I remember you told me this story about how important it is to build relationships. Well, I met this person, and then we hit it off, and we started this great business together. And we've had this great business for the last 20 something years, somebody that I built a relationship with, because I remember you talked about how important it is to build relationships. Um, or I'm now teaching because I remember how much time you would spend coming to our school. So I decided I wanted to do that. So I've been teaching and mentoring for the past 20 years. I remember those
Wow.
things. Those are the things that I want to hear, that I think I may hear.
I think, Khalid, that's a great legacy. I want to thank you for sharing that. I think that every activist, everybody that has decided to take a stand, get off the bench and into the game, should think this way. And they should think, what are people 50 years from now going to say about me? What did I stand for? And that, I think, that will help them think about what kind of impact they want to make, not just on the next election, but on the people that they're interacting with on a daily basis. So you have given us a very good lesson on the mindset that people need to have when they get active. And I want to thank you for that. And I feel grateful that the people that watch this interview will pick up that message.
I hope so. And it's just a matter of asking who's going to be better off because I was here.
That's exactly right. Well said. Thank you, Khalid. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
joining us.
It's been a pleasure.